Coming to paperback and e-readers, Esteem Season of the Witch Girl. The aspiring angel takes on a wicked teenage witch in this action-packed all-new Esteem series adventure. Pre-order your copy of Esteem Season of the Witch Girl at Amazon.com and other online booksellers. One of my viewers wanted to know how long it took for a bill that wound up getting rejected to become a law. Now, this viewer is upset regarding the proposed bill that would ban transgender males from competing in women's sports, and was upset after hearing that the Senate wound up rejecting this bill due to members of the Blue Party voting against it. Now, what the viewer needs to understand is that there is a process for a bill to become a law, and when a bill gets rejected, it doesn't mean it's over for that proposed bill to become a law, because there are three outcomes for a bill once it gets rejected as related to being voted down the first time. And in these three outcomes, a bill can still wind up on one of these roads. And the first road that that bill can wind up on, with the demands of we the people, is that that bill that wound up getting rejected can wind up being brought back by those representatives and basically be voted on once more. And that's the first process that can happen to that bill, and that can lead to that bill on the second vote be put back on track to be voted into law. Now, the second process that could happen for this bill is that this bill could basically wind up getting rejected, and the representatives who proposed this bill could possibly see the results of the bill winding up getting turned down and basically go out here and let the bill basically fade into limbo. And as it fades into limbo, what they will do is again have the bill floating around, but they won't bring the bill back up. No, they'll leave the bill floating around, hoping maybe people, when they get enough support, they can bring the bill back up for legislation. And the third outcome that can happen for a bill is that that bill could wind up eventually just winding up being withdrawn. And when the bill is withdrawn, that's basically when the bill is basically dead at this point, and this proposed bill that was presented will not wind up becoming a law at all, because the bill just does not have the support as related to the representatives in Congress or the support of special interests. So that bill basically winds up dying because it doesn't have the support as related to the representatives to get enough votes, nor did it have the support as related to the special interests to be able to basically lobby to get the bill and make it a priority, nor does it have the support of we the people, and that can lead to that bill basically wind up dying as related to it being proposed, and basically going out here and never being considered once again. And that's the final fate of a bill, and that's how the political process works as related to these kinds of legislation. Now, when it comes down to the legislation that the viewer is proposing, this legislation is one that is popular with a lot of women who play sports, who want to basically make it where they don't have to deal with what they believe to be unfair competition from members of the alphabet community, who basically are looking to compete against them and gain an unfair advantage because they can't compete with men. And this law basically was one proposed by women who looked to participate in sports, and it has some support on the right wing, and that support possibly could lead to this bill possibly being brought back as related to being a piece of legislation as related to some women who compete in sports. Moreover, there could be some support from lobbyists as related to the fields of sports, of women's sports, those lobbyists could basically bring this type of bill back. But when it comes down to these kinds of bills and the time it takes to, again, keep bringing them back, it can be months, it can be weeks, and in some cases it can be years, depending on where the support is. Now, how long it takes for one of these bills to get blocked, again, when it came down to this bill was basically blocked by members of the Blue Party, and blocked by members of the Blue Party who basically, again, are still caught up in looking to push a leftist agenda. However, if people are serious about getting legislation passed, they have to come out and speak out for that legislation the way many came out for that 1994 crime bill that Joe Biden basically wrote that looked to persecute black people. Now, we were coming out of the aftermath of the crack epidemic, and again, this whole crime bill was basically popular because it was people fed up with all of the crime going on all across the country due to the crack epidemic, and they made black people the face of that bill, and that's how they were able to get this legislation passed that was able to persecute black people. And again, that's all because we the people made those demands, and that is the thing that can lead to a bill being fast-tracked into a law. It's all about the demands of we the people. It's all about the demands of we the people and what the people want. And when it comes down to any legislation, yes, there are people who will go out here and try to block said legislation, but the whole thing is it's based on we the people making those demands, getting that bill brought back up as related to law. Because if the representatives go out here and get enough people making demands, then that bill has to be made into law, because that is the will of we the people. Now, when it comes down to these laws, sometimes they also get, again, further consideration, because there are special interests like corporations and groups that basically, again, lobby the congressmen and congresswomen. And as they lobby the congressmen and congresswomen, they can accelerate getting a bill that was rejected back on the floor to be debated, and they can go out here and get that bill brought up very quickly because they have that money from super PACs and other things to get those bills made into a priority. However, in a lot of cases, when it comes down to proposed bills, if there is no demand of we the people or any demand from special interests, what happens is that there are two fates that happen to this bill that gets blocked. One is it basically winds up, like I spoke about before, in a limbo, and as it winds up being stuck in this limbo, it basically is still floating around, and as it's floating around, there's an opportunity to possibly bring it back in one of the other chambers, because what people don't know is that if a bill gets rejected in the Senate, it can be brought back in the House of Representatives and voted on and then brought back to the Senate. This is what happened in the case of many of these bills that eventually became laws. What happens is that it may get rejected in one chamber, but then brought back in another chamber with a couple of modifications and brought back. And after it's brought back, it can then be voted on once more. And that's how that bill has a chance once it is rejected, because once it's in limbo, it's still in play and can have it be brought back, because what that representative who proposed the bill can do is go out here and network with other representatives to basically have that bill brought on with other bills that they have, and again combine different things that's related to a more popular policy with that policy. And that's how they can go out here and get that law passed. That's how they sometimes do things. They will tie the funding of something else that's popular with this bill, and this is something that's done in the House all the time and the Senate all the time. This is all part of the deal making. And sometimes when they do this, again, it allows them to get that law passed, and again, get that law passed under the table. in a way that basically allows the politicians to get the policies that people want passed into law. Now, again, that third fate is the one that can basically be the kiss of death for a bill, is when the bill winds up dying. And some bills basically wind up dying because they become extremely unpopular, and as they are extremely unpopular, they get proposed, and they wind up being proposed, but they don't even, some of them, what happens to them is that they don't even get brought to the floor for a debate, and that's basically the end of the line for them. Laws such as laws like are talking about giving people, increasing their taxes, sometimes those bills wind up dying, or policies that are ones that upset people, those wind up dying, and they basically wind up dying and become forgotten. And the politician who proposes them, he doesn't want to, or she doesn't want to deal with the consequences of being voted out of office, so they bring up the bill, but then they let the bill die, and as they let the bill die, they move on to other bills that are either brought up by the people or bills that are brought up by their lobbyist friends and special interest associates. As they bring up bills, they basically bring these bills up, and those bills get to be priority. But the bills that don't have much support or cannot get them a bullet point on their resume of accomplishments for re-election, those bills basically wind up dying, and as they wind up dying, nobody really brings them back up. That's just the way it goes in Washington and in state legislatures. When these bills wind up dying, they basically sometimes just let them die because they want to be able to continue going on with their career. And as they're looking to go on with their career, they will basically let the blocked bill, or the bill that wasn't brought up to the floor, they let that bill just wind up dying and focus on ones that will allow them to create policy that will be popular enough to get them reelected. Because at the end of the day, it's about getting legislation passed that can get the candidate to move forward. Now, the viewer, as they were talking about this whole issue of individuals from the alphabet community competing in women's sports, these transgender individuals, they also wanted to ask me, do I support females competing in female sports and males competing in male sports? Now, when it comes to sports, I believe that if you want to go out here, you need to have females competing against females and males competing against males. And when it comes down to these alphabet individuals who are transgender, they need to have their own category with their own awards. Again, if you want to make things, again, equally fair, then these individuals need to be competing in their own category. And the females, again, do not need to have to be competing against an individual who wants to say that they are female. No, that's not fair to them. A category needs to be made separate for the transgender individuals if they want to compete in sports, and the females and the males can compete in their sports, and that's the way it needs to be. This is a way we can see if these individuals can compete again against individuals in their own group and make it fair to them, where we can measure their skill and measure their skill in a way based on what is so-called merit. And again, this would be equally inclusive and would not encroach on the female competitors and not encroach on them and their ability to be able to compete in sports. Now, when it comes down to this whole situation, again, this is all possibly something that's possibly going to have to be settled in and not only with legislation, but settled in the courts. That's where I see everything going with this whole issue as related to sports and gender. I believe it possibly is going to have to be settled in the courts. Now, when it comes down to it, again, President Trump has said that he has declared that transgenders or alphabet individuals like this are not considered to be competed in women's sports in order to get federal funding, but I believe that there will be lawsuits, and again, lawsuits as related to things, and I also believe that there will, when it comes down to these laws, again, it's going to be a long, rough process, and eventually we're going to have to get interpretation of law from the Supreme Court to settle this entire situation and get that whole legislation from the Supreme Court to settle this entire situation, because it's only going to be settled, I believe, with the judicial branch showing the interpretation of law as related to Title IX, and basically that interpretation of law will be the only way to settle this whole situation, because this is a very sensitive subject, but the whole thing is it's one that I believe, again, is only going to be settled in the courts, and again, settled in the courts because when it comes down to America, again, there needs to be, again, either a interpretation of law, because this whole situation is a testy one that will test our nation's mettle and test our nation's mettle as related to our laws. And again, the time it takes for these type of laws, again, they get proposed, and if they get rejected, what it does is, again, based on the popularity of that law, this legislation can come back in less than a couple of weeks if it's a very popular piece of legislation, or if it's not very popular, or the candidates don't believe, or not the candidates, but the representatives don't believe is going to help them in re-election. This can wind up in limbo for years, or it can just and wind up being forgotten, or it could just basically die and never be brought back up. That's how it works in the whole political process. It's all about demand, and it's all about demand of we the people. That's how it leads to bills becoming laws. It's all about the demands of we the people, and sometimes the demands of special interests. This is how the process of government works as related to the legislative branch, and it's all about, again, people making this a priority. That's how quick this bill can become a law, or possibly could wind up just basically being forgotten as something that the representatives don't want to talk about. Now, this was a video requested by one of my viewers, and if you want to request a video, you can drop a donation for a minimum of $15 to the PayPal or the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. And if I know something about that subject, I will make that video for you. And if you want to pick up some of my books on the SJS Direct imprint, you can find those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find them at other online booksellers like Draft2Digital, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, and big box retailers like Walmart and Target. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available on Lulu. John Haynes at Death's Door. The man who rules the world takes on the Greek god of death in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes comic book. Get your copy of the first John Haynes comic at Lulu.com today. Coming to paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, A Thorn in My Side. The man who rules the world takes on an agent from the CIA from the Black Boule in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes series adventure. Pre-order your copy of John Haynes' A Thorn in My Side at Amazon.com and other online booksellers. Now available in paperback and e-readers, ISIS Legacy. The sorority secrets of the goddess next door are revealed in this all-new ISIS series adventure. Get ISIS Legacy in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.